The mic's not working.
Mike, is it on?
Yeah, the mic's on. Hear that?
No.
Okay. Yes, so welcome. It's really, did you hear that? All right. We put that urban myth to rest. The microphone is working. Right, I'm only going to say a few words because I'm not the reason you're here. You're here to hear from people who were immediately affected by this memorable.
Bob, can you speak up?
No. Yes, yes. And thank you. Thank you. As I said, you're not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from the people who were immediately affected by this epical event. Sorry about that. But I do want to say it is wonderful to see so many people turning out to listen to something that probably still affects many of you and for whom it is not really a distant memory. I also want to say thank you for coming out for a live event. You know, it's been a long time since we've seen this many people in this room, and I certainly hope it's not going to be the last time. So with all that, I'd like to introduce Peter Nystrom, our mayor, who has a few syllables that he'd like to share with you. Thank you again.
To borrow a phrase from our previous speaker, I'm not the main event either, so I'm going to be brief. But I am very, very happy to be here with all of you. I grew up on Broad Street, down around the old Broad Street School. I remember vividly the event. I was 6 years old. I remember my parents talking about it the morning after. And I'm also very happy to see Wally Lamb. I got to know Wally Lamb when I was a little guy because his sisters used to babysit my brothers and I. And we knew his dad, my dad and his dad worked together at NPU. So it's really great to see him. Years later, I became his UPS driver up in Mansfield. So I got to go to his house. I didn't know he was there, but then I soon delivered something there. But it's so much fun to see him. The first and only moment really now is to present a proclamation, and I'm here to honor Thomas Moody. And I think it's important that we do that. I also quickly introduce Alderman Grant Neuendorf, who's standing in the back. He's joined us as well this evening, and I don't see other members, but this is a proclamation from the city of Norwich. Whereas on March 6, 2023, we commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Spaulding Pond Dam collapse. And whereas Spaulding Pond Dam, a large wooden enclave, was so full and started to show small leaks discovered in the afternoon by park workers who reported it, along with many other leaks that would be dismissed as understood leakage, it was not. And whereas a swift and deadly maelstrom, the Great Norwich Flood of 1963, was written from the memories of Thomas R. Moody Jr. and recount the horror of the night and its family's tragic loss. And whereas Thomas R. Moody Jr. was one of 3 young children to suffer through the Great Norwich Flood, and whereas Thomas R. Moody Jr.'s 2 brothers were saved by Tony Orsini and his father, while trying to save his mother and couldn't. Whereas Thomas R. Moody Jr. lives in Texas with his wife, Deanne, and with 2 children, Brooklyn and Evan, where he is a nuclear power plant supervisor. Whereas Thomas R. Moody Jr.'s book is a recount of all the horror of one night in the aftermath of the flood, and his family's handling a loss so great that he will never forget the loss of his mother and the other 5 people that were lost. Now therefore, I, Mayor Peter Nystrom, and Norwich City Council President Pro Tem Joseph A. DeLucia, on behalf of the Norwich City Council and the citizens of the city of Norwich, to hereby thank Thomas R. Moody Jr. on his preserving the history of the Great Norwich Flood, dated the 6th day. Thank you very much. Roberta Vincent?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Roberta Delgado Vincent, and I was living on Boswell Avenue when the flood happened in 1963. My story is shared on the video, so I won't tell you much about it. But as a last Green Valley walk leader, I have been honored to be able to share the story of the Moody family on the night of the flood and how their lives were forever impacted, and the story of our hero, Tony Orsini. With a show of hands, how many relatives of those who perished in the flood are here with us this evening? So our thoughts and our prayers continue to be with you at this time. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Walter John Lamb, AKA Wally.
So,
Oh, Mike.
I used to teach at NFA, I can yell if I have to. So anyway, first of all, I want to jog Peter Nystrom's memory a bit, because not only did my sisters babysit for you and your brothers, but I did too. I was the fun babysitter. Anyway, so I grew up on McKinley Avenue, 33 McKinley Avenue. And on the night that the dam broke and water came flushing down toward the city, I had fallen asleep in front of the TV watching the Beverly Hillbillies. No doubt, I remember it vividly. And my mother sort of shook me awake, and she said, there's been a dam that's broken, and there's water rushing through, on the way down to, to the city. And I was half asleep, and what I was picturing is like, oh, we're all gonna go down and watch a puddle or something. And so we walked from our house down to the intersection of Grove Street and Franklin Avenue, and across the street, it looked like Musquamaket, and it sounded. There was just this roaring sound. I mean, it was not something I ever experienced before that, and something I've never experienced since then. So it's sound-wise and sight-wise, it's really vivid in my memory. And then 2 days later, oh, by the way, I brought some artifacts here. So, yeah, there used to be a newspaper, I think it was an afternoon newspaper called the Hartford Times. And this was the Hartford Times front page the day after the flood. And I got that copy from a Great Norwich guy, Dennis Riley, who was the reporter, the Norwich reporter for the Hartford Times at that point. Now, I wanted to show you one other picture, and this came out on Friday. The flood was on a Wednesday evening, and on Friday, the Norwich Bulletin ran a story about the three Moody brothers and the tragedy that took their mother's life, and also the heroics that were performed by their dad, right? And this guy over here, Tony Orsini, who I think is going to be speaking to you later. And by the way, he kind of looks like a jazz musician over here, doesn't he? No smoking those jazz cigarettes there, Tony, right? But anyway.
Recreational marijuana.
Still feisty, this guy. Anyway, so I remember looking at the bulletin, looking at all the pictures, and then this was the one that was most memorable to me. It is a picture of a nurse and the 3 Moody children, the 3 brothers. And I'll unfold this somewhere before this whole thing wraps up so that people can see that they wanted the papers are a little flimsy at this point, but they're still visible. Anyway, I was really taken with the story, and I remembered about those 3 brothers, and thought of them a lot between the time I was 12 when this happened and the time that I was an NFA teacher. Now, I remember that one of the student janitors at NFA, he used to come around with a big barrel and and empty out the trash cans at the different classrooms. Was Sean Moody, and I did not make the connection at the time. He was a really nice kid, skinny, tall, lanky, and very friendly, very humble. But it was only later, I think, that I connected the dots and realized that he was the baby in this picture. Okay? He's squawking away. I don't know, Pat, does he still cry?
All the time.
Typical big brother, yeah. But anyway, so when I sat down to write, I think it was my 4th novel, I very often write from memories about Norwich, which in my work I call 3 Rivers, because I want to fictionalize it because I don't want to be anchored by the truth. I want to sort of go where I want to go. And so 3 Rivers, there's a flood in a book that I wrote called We Are Water. And there are 2 antecedents. There is the flood and the story of a family that loses its mother in the Maelstrom, but also it's a story of an unschooled Norwich writer who I call Josephus Jones, but he really the real guy's name was Ellis Ruley, and he has been celebrated quite a bit these days, whereas he was pretty much unknown, except for the tragic way that he died. There is a park over on the east side, and it is the park, the Ellis Ruley Park. You can go over there. It's kind of a magical place, I think. It's quiet. It's off the main road, off of Main Street, and I don't know. I always feel when I've been there 2 or 3 times, I always feel just I don't know, really something spiritual there. So anyway, I can't remember, Tom, how you and I got to know each other, but
I'm going to talk about it in my speech, so
Okay.
don't steal my thunder.
all right. Previous and coming attractions. But Tom and I got to know each other at the time that we were both writing our books.
That's exactly right.
Yes. And Tom, of course, was writing nonfiction. I was fictionalizing around the true thing. And also, I got to know Tony and his wife Jan much better. I sort of knew you guys, but then we got to be friends, and during this whole thing. And so it's great to see Jim Moody and Sean Moody, and of course Tom, the author. And I think it's time for me to shut up, and we'll go on with the program, Roberta. Okay?
Give the mic to Regan.
Good evening, everyone. Can you guys hear me back there? Is that good? Okay, awesome. My name is Regan Miner, and I'm the Executive Director of the Norwich Historical Society, and it's my honor to be here with you all this evening. The Norwich Historical Society's mission is to preserve, protect, and promote the rich history of Norwich, Connecticut. NHS has been a part of planning events that commemorate the collapse of the Spaulding Pond Dam for many years. And as a personal connection, my best friend is Alyssa Engdahl, who is the granddaughter of Margaret Honey Moody. Back in 2014, the Norwich Historical Society partnered with survivors of those impacted by the flood to create a plaque commemorating the event and honoring the life-saving tree. Over the years, NHS has worked with Roberta Vincent, John Wagner, Tony Orsini, and many others to host guided walking tours of the path the flood took from Mohegan Park to downtown Norwich. These walks were always very moving and left a deep impact on the walk participants. We gave these tours annually until the COVID-19 pandemic changed the way we could offer programming. The Norwich Historical Society was able to pivot our operations during the onset of the pandemic by switching our programs to a virtual platform. NHS partnered with organizations such as the Last Green Valley to create virtual walking tours in 2020. One of the walks that we turned into a virtual experience was the Spaulding Pond Dam Flood, which we'll be sharing with the audience in just a moment. This virtual experience is led by survivors and eyewitnesses that will relive the event which claimed 6 lives. I'd like to thank Nick Bellis and Fran Cathalis from the Last Green Valley for all their help filming and editing this video. I hope you guys enjoy a virtual look at the Spaulding Pond Dam Flood walking tour.
Get my stuff organized here. Well, first of all, you're probably wondering why I'm sitting. I was recently, a few months back, in a car accident, and I had the displeasure of breaking my tailbone. And that hasn't healed yet, so standing for any prolonged length is kind of problematic. So the event was kind enough to let me, oh, yeah, that is a difference, isn't it? Was kind enough to let me sit, so I hope this isn't a problem for anybody. So, and by sitting, I'm still at least 1.5 feet taller than Tony Orsini, so that can't be a problem, right?
I'm shrinking, Tom.
Tony, I love you, man. You know that. I want to thank everybody for coming out and the 2 ladies that organized this. What a great job they've done. And Mayor Nystrom, oh my God, man, what a surprise! That was amazing. I did not expect that. And so thank you all for coming out and listening to this. I'll warn you ahead of time. I'm going to talk for about 20 to 30 minutes. A lot of it personal. So if this is the time that you want to go take a bathroom break or just go walk around and ignore what I want to say, I don't blame you. What I wanted to talk about is the personal path that I took in writing The Swift and Deadly Maelstrom. We've talked enough about the history of the event, and I wasn't going to talk about that at all. That means so I can put my fingers up. And the original, and this is the foundation that went into writing it. And I can tell you that when I started thinking about pursuing the idea of writing this book, I had no idea that it was going to turn into what it has. All the memorials that we talked about, all the events that we talked about, it really has turned into something really amazing. I mean, not so much in terms of book sales or anything like that, but just in terms of things like this. People honoring it, people remembering it, and I think that's just really amazing. It really is a shock to me. When I I first started this, I just wanted to really have some sort of chronicle piece of history for my kids. I mean, something from their father as an everlasting message to them, something that would continually connect me to them forever. And this was at a point in the very early 90s, and I'd still been relatively newly married. I had a wonderful little boy named Ryan, and a toddler little girl named Brooklyn, who's actually here tonight. And she's the beautiful girl there. Stand up. I told you I was going to have you stand up. This is my daughter, Brooklyn. When I first started envisioning telling this story, at the beginning, and I'm not kidding you, it was going to be nothing more than a few page handwritten document on a yellow legal pad, and just leave it at my house with all the details that I knew about this event, and it would uncover it, sort of after I was gone in the cabinet somewhere. Whoa, look what Dad wrote. And this was after I was long departed, and like I said, boy was I wrong. And this initial thinking really got a kick after my first son, Ryan, unfortunately, tragically passed away at 4 years old in 1994. And this was from a disastrously cancerous brain tumor, one that came completely out of the blue, and which was an experience that just set me back on my heels as a parent like nothing you could believe. Trust me, folks, there is no greater pain and suffering like watching your firstborn baby degenerate from a disease this awful, and then hearing that no matter what the doctors do, he's going to pass on. And then being told that that you'll have to undergo this, you'll have to deal with this for at least a year, which was his diagnosed time frame. And as he slowly deteriorated, it was literally hell on earth, folks. I mean, it was not a good time. And so this was February of 1994 when he passed on, February 15th to be exact. And as you can guess, I then had to start looking at my life from a very, very different perspective. I still had a very beautiful 2-year-old daughter by this time, Brooklyn. I won't make you stand up again. And she now became my entire focal point at home. And it was ironic because at the time I was working in nuclear power. I'm a retired nuclear power plant supervisor, and I was in a job. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Roberta. Okay, it will help. I should have thought of it.
No charge.
Put it on my tab. It was, like I said, it was ironic because I was working at a nuclear power plant in Texas that I got in a job that I really, really became passionate with. So here I had this counterbalance of major grief at home, but at work I was doing exceptionally well and really enjoyed going to work. And so I had that escape, unfortunately, or fortunately. So it was just a very weird time. So and of course with this, I really started thinking hard about my dad because now we had sort of similar losses, right? You know, my dad lost my mom, now I had lost my son, and so this really became the first major trigger that got me out of the yellow legal pad stage and started me thinking about, okay, this flood story now becomes something other than just you know, a yellow legal pad thing, and of course I wasn't nowhere near ready to write a book about it yet, right? And so, you know, life went on, and I got the idea of how I was gonna expand on this story. Very close. Soon, my son Evan was born in 1997, and of course, my son Evan is here tonight. And Evan, it's your turn to stand up. And of course, that was another emotional target for me. While at work, I was expanding even further. As the position that I had, and I won't go into the details of it, I'd gotten an opportunity to get a senior reactor operator certification. So my position to be offered that opportunity was a very big deal. And for me to then get the certification was a huge accomplishment, which I then was able to put into work. We did refueling outages at a nuclear power plant, and I won't go into any details about that. But that was the business that I was in. So things in Texas now we're starting to pick up, right? You know, now I got two beautiful kids, and you know, the grieving for Ryan never ceases. I grieve for him to this day, but it's now starting to even out a little bit. Back in Connecticut, though, things weren't going so well. My grandmother, my beloved Nana, was unfortunately rapidly deteriorating around this time. Like I said, this was 1997. This was the woman that took us in after the flood. She was 61 years old after the flood, and she took us in, my three brothers, and she had 7 children of her own. So this woman was amazing. One of the major premonition stories about the flood was March 2nd, 1963 was my 4th birthday. I just turned 4 when the flood happened. And we were having a little birthday party for me at the house, obviously. We lived on Lake Street, on the bottom floor under the Orsinis. And my mother was pulling the cake out of the oven, and of course my Nana was there, and my mother put the cake on the top of the oven, and she suddenly stood up, and with this stark look on her face, turned and looked at Nana, who was her mother, and said, "If anything ever happens to me, I want you to take care of my boys." And of course my Nana was like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean by that?" And, you know, "You're talking nonsense," kind of thing. And so that story has come down through her to all 3 of us, and we've passed it on to our kids. So it was just amazing, and it went down the road after we all recovered from the flood, and went to when we lived in low-income housing on the west side. There was a lot of debate after the flood on how we were going to be either kept together or broken up, and my Nana was like, "Absolutely not. Keeping these kids together." So anyway, ultimately, over time, she was forced to leave that house it was on Western Avenue, that we were all 3 brought up. You know, she had gotten older, and she had to be shuffled around until she ended up at the Hamilton Arms Living Assisted Facility. where her memory and Alzheimer's ultimately took her at the age of 97 years in 1999. This, of course, became another major, major emotional event for me, and another major stake in this book's origination. Excuse me once. And again, this was 1999, but I still wasn't ready or even capable to write about it yet. You know, I was thinking about it a little bit. I knew I wasn't confident enough, nor did I know enough about writing or constructing a book to start on such a large project as this at this point. So what I will call the final ingredient that went into starting to write this book. The thing that, you know, caused me to put pen to paper, or I guess more accurately, keyboard to screen, were the final trials and tribulations that my dad went through. And so let's understand that this was a man that never recovered, nor would he ever be the same after this tragedy. I remember a story that he told me many years later. Excuse me. When we were discussing the flood. And this was when they were looking for my mom the next day. It was really a surreal scene from what I've learned, with his brothers and my mom's brothers, all of them out there at the site where the car had been violently tossed over, just next to that garage roof that we saw in the video at Lamparell's car dealership. The roof was gone now; it had crashed down to the next level. And having been washed away by the flood. And so all the Moody's and the Shays began at early morning search, and it was my Uncle Jerry, who I'm going to introduce here when I'm done, that ultimately found her. And my mom was only about 50 or 60 yards away from the car in a massive pile of debris. The daylight helped him see her house coat, and as he dug around a little bit, he saw her fingers, and ultimately her wedding ring. And then he looked up because he knew it was her, and didn't see anybody for a little bit. So he finally found a policeman to come down and help him. The policeman got more, and so they ultimately started digging her out. Like I said, a very surreal scene. So now they had to find my dad to tell him that they found her and to show him. And so they finally found him, brought him up there. He took one quick look, and all he did was walk away. He walked down. If you're familiar with the terrain there, it's multiple levels from where the car was to get down to the floor, down to Franklin Street, and then it turns up to McKinley Avenue. And there was an old, a lot of you might remember the old World War II armory that was on McKinley Avenue on the left side if you're walking up McKinley Avenue. Well, he made it that far, and he just sat down on the sidewalk and put hid in his hands in tears and everything, and just said to himself over and over, "What am I going to do now?" It was just a period, obviously, and continued to be. So, my dad, for those of you that knew him, he was always an uptight, sensitive, sort of temperamental person, and that was right from birth. And it was only by God's will that he had met the perfect wife for him. If ever a man needed someone exactly like my mother as his wife, it was my dad. I mean, she guided him emotionally, rationally, and intellectually. They were a couple that depended upon each other in a way that a young marriage was meant to be, in my opinion. So when she passed, I mean, all of this just disappeared from his character and temperament, and he just lost a major part of his spirit. So it was then that we all moved to low-income housing on the west side of town. Like I mentioned, Western Avenue. And from what I've learned, the housing administration over there basically gave my Nana an amazing deal. And that was dipped in empathy and sorrow. And she had to pay very low rent. My dad couldn't live there because of his income, even though it wasn't a great job, but his income would have set it too high for him to actually live there. But he had free access to come and go. He could stay there as long as he wanted. And for him, he took an old decrepit apartment downtown on Franklin Square, where he lived for the rest of his life. He seemed to love that apartment, and I never understood why. And as you can imagine, this tragedy also destroyed him physically. He started drinking. I mean, you know, just beers at first, but of course that generated into harder alcohol over time. And he didn't really take good care of himself in terms of eating either. He was always fairly spare, for those of you that knew him, but soon he became a lot thinner. Nana would have dinner for us boys every night, but he stopped coming home to eat with us, and only rarely would we see him have a good meal. He got let go at the American Optical Company in 1994 for downsizing, and so here he was at 58 years old, and he was forced to take a retirement job at the Big Y grocery store out there by Walmart. And he worked there for another 12 years. At the beginning, he really liked it, but toward the end, I think because they characterized it as downsizing, and my brothers know a lot more about this than I do, but I think because his health was deteriorating, I think they got rid of him. And so at this point, he deteriorated pretty badly, both mentally and physically. So by this point, he deteriorated badly, both mentally and physically. It was no surprise to me to get a call from my brothers to hear that Dad had checked himself into the ER at Bacchus Hospital again. He had done this a number of times. He was in pain, something was wrong. I'd hear from my brothers, Dad's in the ER again. Okay. And he'd be out, in a couple days with advice from the doctors to do this or do that. And of course, he would try it, didn't like it, and ignore it. And, this particular time, he checked in. He had been experiencing excruciating pain, mostly in his lower body, due to blood clots that were building up. And, it was his own fault. And Sean's wife, Pat, will be the first one here to say so. They had recommended a gluten-free diet. Pat, you remember?
Yep.
And he tried it for a few days and he ignored it. And he kept wondering why he was in such pain. And I hate to make fun of my dad because he was really a great man when he was younger. But when he was older, he was just like a child. Anyway, so he leaves the hospital, or no, he had checked in, I should say. He had checked in and gotten the advice on the gluten-free diet. And I'm sorry to be taking so long. Anyway, and my brothers had to give him injections for that, which they gave him injections a couple times, and then he told my brothers, don't bother anymore, I'm not doing it anymore. And this just went on until Friday, September 25th, 2009, when he went back into the ER again. And by this time, his body was shutting down, and now there were major signs of sepsis that were setting in. And September 27th, 2009, he was critical again, or he was critical. Ironically, I didn't even know anything that had gone wrong. My dad and I always had a 9:30 Sunday morning phone call, and I called him, and he didn't answer, which was, well, he was a creature of habit. So about 2 hours later, Sean called me to tell me that Dad was dying, and to get up here. I was in Texas at the time, and so here I am booking flights for 4 people. And I'm driving to the airport. Sean's wife, Pat, has the phone, and she's getting me to say goodbye to my dad over the phone. He couldn't talk, which meant I couldn't really talk either. And then a couple hours later, Jim's ex-wife calls me and says that he passed away. So all I could think about were the good times that Dad and I had as I get to the airport and fly to Connecticut. So that's how he passed on. And so after the funeral and the burial, when we got back to Texas, it really hit me that it was time to tell this story in a manner that anyone and everyone could access. And I remember when I decided to write this book, exactly, was outside on my driveway at my house in Texas. At that point in my life, I was really into reading and writing, much more so than I had been. I was writing some book reviews on Amazon and trying to put little literary flares on each one of them. And I was watching and following major authors. Of course, Wally Lamb was my first one. And listening to their nuanced interviews. David Foster Wallace, who's an author I'm sure nobody in here has heard of, maybe Wally has, became sort of my hero, while a much lesser known journalist named Dan Okren totally intrigued me. So these were guys that I was following and really getting into and getting sort of the writing bug. And so this was early 2010 when I started out. So I began to gather all the information that I had at my house. I did have a bunch of information on the flood. Books, family information. Tony Orsini was an amazing source of information. He helped me out when we were up. If you remember the memorial at the dam, when we came up to do that, Tony made a whole bunch of copies for me, and he gave me some people to contact, which was what I desperately needed. One of the most funny and ironic stories begins with a conversation over email that I had with my absolutely beautiful cousin named Nora Katsuba. Where is she? Stand up. I was discussing all this with her when I was writing this book, and she related to me that famous Norwich and national author Wally Lamb was also using the 1963 flood as a part of his upcoming book, new novel, that he was going to use the 1963 flood, and that I should meet him and share information and share our stories. And I said, well, man, I don't know. I don't know about that. And Nora said, no. I'm going to contact him, and you two guys are going to meet. I'm like, Nora, I don't know. And let me tell you about Nora. When Nora gets on a mission, you do not get in her way. And she's absolutely one of the most responsible agents for this book being published as anyone. And so Wally, and because of Nora, Wally and I actually got together. First by email, and then in person. We met up here, and we established a great relationship while we were writing our books. By this point in his research and writing, he had accumulated numerous contacts, all of which he then gracefully passed on to me. And I'll tell you, this book would not have been nearly what it came out to be without that assistance. I was able to contact people like Bill Longo, the owner of the Longo Funeral Home, where the tree is, where we ultimately came to reside that evening. I was also able to speak with Dennis Riley, who Wally talked about. And I'll repeat it, he was a Hartford Times reporter at the time, and who also later announced my high school basketball games when I was a senior on WICH radio, when I was a senior at NFA. He got an early word that night about the dam break and evacuated his Broadway office. He raced up Boswell Avenue and made it to Centennial Square just as the flood flow came and destroyed that half of the Turner Stanton Mill. So he got eyewitness testimony on seeing the mill go down. And I never would have had any of this information if it wasn't for Wally's contacts. So amazing that we made that connection due to Nora. Nora, you want to stand up again? So it was all this newfound information that was really startling to me. I mean, here I was, man, I had a whole bunch now. And as I was developing my writing timeline, I started to realize that I was still missing, really quite a lot. And as I started writing to this timeline, I also saw the need to fill in these gaps. And that's when I realized that the Norwich Bulletin newspaper of that period, leading up to the rebuilding of the new dam, held a lot of this information. And this meant that I was going to have to come back up to review every day from the flood, which is March of 1963, through September 17th, 1965, when the new dam was declared complete. An event that my father actually refused to attend, ironically. He told me that late in his life. So here I come, back up to Norwich, right here to the Otis Library, in one of the research rooms, and I remember the first day. I I asked the desk attendant, it was a young man, and I go, I want to review every day of the Norwich Bulletin from March 6, 1963 through September 17, 1965. Right now? I go, well, in reasonable chunks. Okay, I'll go get them. And, but the staff here was absolutely wonderful. And I was also lucky, really lucky in terms of timing because, as I said, I worked in nuclear power. We had a process called benchmarking, which means sharing information between like nuclear plants. And so, fortunately, the Maelstrom plants in Waterford, units 2 and 3, were preparing for outages, and part of the benchmarking initiative is getting help from other plants to review their outage strategy. And Comanche Peak, where I worked, we were in a down period, and so I contacted Maelstrom and said, hey, I'm available. Would you like? Oh yeah, absolutely. So I contacted my bosses, and they knew about my Maelstrom background. I started at Maelstrom when I first went into the industry, and they said, yes, absolutely, go. So I got to come up here, do all the research, and my company paid for it. Of course, I had to go to Maelstrom and do some work first, but anyway. So I write the manuscript. I finally, I do all the research and everything, which took a while, and get the manuscript written. I turn it. Now I'm at a point where I need to find a publisher, and I knew this was not going to be a book that a legacy publisher would buy. So I was going to have to self-publish this book. Difference between legacy publishing and self-publishing, I won't go into the self-publishing means you pay for your manuscript with a self-publishing company. They do all the work, and they publish your book. You pay for it, and then you're taking a gamble on your book, essentially, in sales to get your money back. Pretty simple. And this was actually another area where Wally really helped me. He suggested Ex Libris, which was a reputable self-publishing company, and I didn't know. I mean, I knew. So I took him. I used his guidance, and you've seen this before. I think they came up with an outstanding book, and I've been totally happy with it ever since. And every time I contact them, they printed books for this occasion, and it was published in 2013. So, I mean, we're talking 10 years, and they still jumped right on it. So, I think they're an outstanding company. Okay, so it took from mid-November 2012 right up to the 50th anniversary in 2013 to finally get it published. And, like anybody that's brand new at this game, when the boxes showed up at my house, I ripped them open, took a look at it. Whoa, here's a book with my name on it. I never expected to ever see anything like that, so it was pretty cool. And so we started advertising and distributing it right away. And I mean, make no bones about it, I wasn't under any preconception that it was going to be a great selling book or anything. But it did okay and has done okay to now. I think my first big break was soon thereafter. I got to have a reading and a book signing at the Slater Museum at NFA, which was, I really enjoyed that. Although I ran out of books, not a smart move. Prior to that, I got to go on WICH radio and speak with Stu Breyer, who everybody knows. And we had a call in, and so I got to talk about the flood with Stu and some call-in people. And then one of my great experiences was later on, Wally again, when he was on his tour for We Are Water, was coming through to Dallas at Barnes and Nobles, and he contacted me and asked if I would come up and do a dual reading with him. I was like, are you kidding me? Of course I would. So we got to go up to Dallas and do a dual reading, and oh my God, that was such an honor. I really enjoyed that. And one of the major highlights of publishing this book, and it was in the video in 2014 when the Norwich Historical Society sponsored that huge event for my mom, erected the monument near the tree. And I'm so proud that this stone is still there because of this area of Norwich is, shall we say, not in a very pleasant area of town. This monument does, though, seem to get a lot of respect from the neighboring people, which I totally love and appreciate. And every time that I come back to Norwich, I always stop and take a picture and go to the tree and the site where our car crashed and just stand and remember. And then I always go to the memorial at Mohegan Park and do the same thing. Just look at it, and then we always have lunch at Delia's. Gotta go to Delia's. Nothing like a Delia's grinder, especially if you're from Texas, right? I mean, you know, they don't make Delia's grinders in Texas. That's right. They're right salami. And so as I close, this has been an amazing adventure, again, for far exceeding my wildest dreams, while still continuing to this very day. And I'm so proud to have my kids here with me, and also a new addition to my family, my youngest son's new bride, Lauren. Stand up. Who we're introducing to the Moody side of the family now, and she's a total Texan, but we're accepting her anyway. And this is her first trip to New England, and we're showing her some Moody family history. So I just want to say welcome to my new and beautiful daughter-in-law. And so, basically, as I close, that's how this book came to fruition and how it became written. And so I just want to thank everybody once again for listening to me. And so if you went around and took a pee break or whatever, now you got to come back and listen to the rest of the program. So thanks very much. Thanks. Okay, right now, I want to do something extremely special for me. You heard me talk about, in the narrative, about my Uncle Jerry, who found my mother the next day. My Uncle Jerry is actually here tonight, and he has asked to say a few words. So I get the extreme honor of introducing him. So I'm going to clear the way for my Uncle Jerry. He's the last living son of my Nana. So again, I'm extremely proud to introduce him. So Uncle Jerry. And brother of my mother. Take your time. Hey, Joe. Got it. I'm going to stand for a while.
To the Honorable Mayor of Norwich, Peter Nystrom, I want to send to him my very best. Is he here or you left? Oh, right here, Peter?
He just left.
Oh, he just left.
He has a town meeting.
Well, we'll do that another time. I think this evening you could consider the grief of a mother and the joy of being a grandmother. Now, my family had my mother and father had 5 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. The oldest was Mary, and the youngest was Honey. And Honey was a beautiful baby when she was born. And we brothers always looked at her, and the way she smiled and the long curly hair that she had, we had to call her Honey. And she had that name Honey until adulthood. Now, of course, when my father passed away, Honey and my mother lived together for many years. And then when when Honey left school, she decided to travel with my mother down to Mexico, Cuba, Florida, and home again at her residence in Elizabeth Street, Norwich. And after that, Honey and Ron had a relationship, and eventually they got married and had 3 boys. And the boys were Tommy, Jimmy, and Sean. Now, bear with me a bit because I'm a little humble. Now, the children were together all the time, and my mother had the opportunity to take care of them for many, many years. I know that in time, my daughter had a car when she was in high school. That's the only transportation they had to get to school. And she'd come home late from school, and I said, "Where have you been?" She said, "I've been at study hall." And that went on for several weeks. And finally, in the end, I found out that she was going over to help my mother take care of the children. And Honey, my daughter, brought so much joy to my mother because she was a look-alike like my sister Honey. And wait a minute now. I gotta catch my breath.
Take your time.
I was 34 years old when this tragedy happened. Now, Catherine, my daughter Catherine, went over to help my mother quite often, unbeknownst to us as a family. And my mother always had joy in her eyes when she saw my Catherine, my Catherine. And that's what really happened with my daughter. There were lookalikes. Honey and my daughter Catherine were lookalikes. So the joy of being a mother and a grandmother with children. We had grandchildren, and I'd like to introduce the grandchildren now. The firstborn was my sister Mary was Pat and Nana. The second was my brother Bud. He had 3 children. That was Nora, Mark, and Ellen. And then, of course, I had 3, which was Catherine, Bernadette, and Jeremiah. And then there was Joe, who had two. That was Cindy and Billy. And then there was, after that, after Joe, there was Paul. He had three. Lindsay, Robbie, and Chipper, who was lost at a young age. So, in the end, I'd like to introduce all my mother's grandchildren, if they'd stand. She's a look-alike, like my sister Honey. That's what brought a lot of joy to my mother's eyes. Thank you so much for your time.
Now another great pleasure. My lifetime hero, who is actually responsible for myself, my brother Jim, my brother Sean being here, along with my father, is Mr. Tony Orsini, who, when we talked about Tony Orsini at our house, it was like the entire house got quiet, and it became spiritual, because he was the man. And I can tell you, Tony, that myself, my brother Jim, my brother Sean, all love you to death. And so, with that, I'm going to introduce you. Come say a few words.
Only he wasn't a Yankee.
You know, first of all, I've got a bad tailbone too, but I'm going to stand up.
I take back everything I just said. I tried.
You know, the mayor left, but I wanted to tell him a few words. He was my paper boy growing up when I lived on Lake Street. And he says I still owe him 2 weeks. That's not the whole story. He got it all wrong. In those 2 weeks, it was supposed to be a morning paper. I got it in the middle of the afternoon. So I don't owe him anything. In 10 years, when we have this again, I plan to be here, but I don't want to be last. It's almost past my bedtime. You know, over the years, people did good things that night, helping the 3 survivors after the mill collapsed. The lady on the bottom of Lake Street, Mrs. Tarask, who took the boys into her home when they were damp and cold, dried them up, bundled them up, and drove them to Bacchus Hospital. And then Margaret Honey Moody, who made sure her children were safe before we lost her, a true hero. One other thing, why are we Italians always last?
There you go. Yeah.
Lamb is half Italian, but I guess that doesn't count.
It counts.
I really don't have much to say that hasn't been already said. But I want to thank you all for coming, my family, friends, those interested in the Italian and the Norwich history. It means a lot. 60 years is a long time. Many of you weren't even born. The disastrous flood is a big part of Norwich history and must be passed on. I used to reminisce about growing up on Lake Street in the 50s and the 60s, when it was mostly Italian neighborhood. Everyone had a vegetable garden, some raising chickens in their backyard, homemade wine in the cellar, play in the playground morning until night, good memories with family and friends. I don't think about that much anymore. I think about March 6, 1963, when 6 people lost their lives. My neighbor and 5 from the mill nearby, and a disaster that could have been avoided. 6 of us going down Lake Street in the car, thinking we were going to safe grounds. Turning the corner when a wall of water hit us, turning the car over several times, finally landing on its top. Surrounded by swirling water, getting onto the building when it quickly shifted, losing Mrs. Moody. All we needed were a few more seconds. Knowing we had to get off the building, duck walking the peak of the building, making sure we didn't slip or lose our balance, holding on to the children for dear life, climbing onto the tree of life. When the water receded, I still don't know how we survived. It was a miracle. Many people did heroic things that night. Mrs. Moody was the biggest hero. She made sure her children were safe. That night changed the lives of many people. 8 people went to work that night at the mill. 5 will never see their families again. That evening left a hole in Mr. Moody's heart that would never be filled. 3 young boys without a mother's love, which can never be replaced. But love, support of family, and dedication of a grandmother, Mrs. Moody's mother, Mrs. Shea, who helped raise the 3 boys. Mrs. Moody, looking down, would be very proud. I'd like to introduce 3 people who helped in the video. If they would stand up, please. John and Mike Wagner, sitting somewhere. Dan Kelly. It was Dan, a friend of Mr. Moody's idea, was to put that monument at Mohegan Park in memory of the 6 lives lost. I'd like to thank Otis Library for hosting the program, Julie Menders, Program Director, who's here somewhere. I thank you, Julie. The last Green Valley, the Norwich Historical Society for their support. Regan, thank you. And all the people in the program. I want to give a special thank you to Roberta Vincent. Who over the years has been involved in every ceremony, dedication involving the flood. She made sure every school library in Norwich and surrounding towns received a book. Initiated the process of the Tree of Life to become a notable tree in the historic database. the October walk, which he does annually, walking the path of the flood. He keeps the flood, a big part of Norwich history, alive. Thanks again, Roberta. I want to thank Tom for writing the book. It is a story that had to be told. I knew he spent a lot of time and energy with the research. In closing, there are 91,000 dams in the United States. Many are earth dams, like Spaulding Pond. March 6th disaster alerted cities and states to inspect dams regularly and replace if necessary. Thanks again for coming.
Now, I would like to introduce our former Connecticut State Troubadour, Tom Callinan, who wrote and will sing Norwich Life Saving. I'm sorry.
This is a hopeful song, but things can happen when you least expect them. Like Candid Camera. The waning hours of March the 6th, 1963. No one expected to end their day in a nondescript maple tree. But where could you turn with the deluge approaching? Where might you find sanctuary with the torrent upon you? There was just one place, the rocks of a life-saving tree. It was there in the right place, there at the right time, giving aid and comfort selflessly. That place of refuge where lives were saved, Norwich's life-saving tree. It stood strong enough as the flood swept by, just a lucky encounter. Some say skeptically it didn't reach down to lift up the victim, so how can we call it a life-saving tree? But consider the hero coming out of our midst, who says he was just where he happened to be, and who modestly adds, anyone would have done it. He only acted spontaneously. It was there in the right place, there at the right time, giving aid and comfort selflessly. That place of refuge where lives were saved, Norwich's life-saving tree. For those who survived the Great Norwich Flood, they know they were saved miraculously. 'Tis said if you're drowning, you'll cling to a straw, and if you're lucky to find one, a life-saving tree. We celebrate our first responders, all who went heroically. So now it's time to recognize Norwich's life-saving tree. It was there in the right place, there at the right time, giving aid and comfort selflessly. That place of refuge where lives were saved, Norwich's life-saving tree. Want to help me? It was there in the right place, there at the right time, giving aid and comfort selflessly. That place of refuge where lives were saved, Norwich's life-saving tree. That place of refuge where lives were saved, Norwich's life-saving tree.
Thank you. We want to thank everyone for coming this evening and sharing the story about the Norwich Flood. It has been 60 years today. So certainly, weather today was beautiful. This was a beautiful day. But imagine 60 years ago what the weather was like that evening. So thank you so much for coming and sharing. And Tom's going to be signing books outside if you want to get a book. It's an amazing story. And share it with other people, because you will be surprised how many people do not know about the flood in Norwich.